Hello everyone, it's Axel Reid here again. Recently I uploaded a video on how to clean a handpiece ready for customs inspection. In that video, for the back end, I just used an air compressor to clean that out. But the thought occurred to me that there may be some shearers that don't have any access to an air compressor. So I thought it might be prudent to do a quick video on how to pull this apart, and at the same time I'll show you how to check your bearings in the back. So basically, first thing I do is loosen off the ferrule, because the ferrule is a lot easier to take off when the back end is still attached to the handpiece. So with Heineken handpieces, and I think Lister handpieces now, they also have a hole in the back, so that's quite easy to fit a screwdriver into, and you can just loosen that like so. But I like to leave that attached because it just makes it a bit easier to handle when it comes to getting the caps off. So yeah, it's our next step. These caps are quite hard to get off. So usually that involves digging in with your screwdriver right there, but there is a chance of stabbing yourself while doing that. So if you have a leather glove handy, put it on. Might save you a little bit of skin. So we just start here and lift it up until it comes away. This is probably the trickiest part of handpiece maintenance. It's getting this sucker off. So that's one off. Go around to the other side and lift that off there. Now, one thing to bear in mind is it's important not to overstretch this spring clip, because if you do, your back end isn't going to be tight. So see how that clip isn't on the back end, and it will move side to side like that. So if your spring clip is loose, that's going to be moving around and adding vibration to your shearing. So just bear that in mind. And so I like to leave the spring clip attached here, and just so as it's doesn't get lost. So next step is to loosen off this back cog. Now there are three methods that you can use for doing this, or three tools that you can use. So you can either use a cog spanner, which is by far and away the best tool that you can use, because it is designed specifically for undoing cogs. Secondly, you could use a super shear screwdriver, so that actually fits in the cogs reasonably well. Or if you don't have access to either of those two, you can just use two screwdrivers to loosen it up. So in order to loosen that up, you need to put a screwdriver down inside where the crankshaft is. I don't know if there's enough light there. Because if you just twist the cog around without blocking the crankshaft, your handpiece is just going to keep moving away like that. So that's why we pop a screwdriver in there. Now, if two screwdrivers is the only thing that you have access to, what you can do is come in at the back here, and the cog here unscrews anti-clockwise, so you can wedge that in there and twist the whole handpiece around in an anti-clockwise position. But that isn't necessarily the best thing to do, because people have been known to chip the teeth on their cogs using that method. So for this case, I'm going to use the trusty cog spanner. And that's loose. I can take that glove off now. And so it's just a matter of unscrewing that cog with your thumb until the back end comes off. It's slowly coming away, and voila. And so it's at this point where you can take the ferrule off. And so now you can take the rubber off. And so it's a bit tricky to do that if the ferrule's still attached. And then these parts here, they just slide off. Well, they would do if I had taken the second cog out. And so basically what that entails is you can either grip the end here with a set of pliers. See, it's got a flat surface there, so it's on two sides, so you can grip it with pliers, or go in with your cog spanner, and that is actually perfectly sized to fit over the top. And then you can just go in there and loosen that like that, and unscrew that. And so now you have the ability to pull that apart like that, and if you need to, you can go in there with a rag, give it a good clean for customs, and didn't do too bad a job before the air compressor. There's only a couple of hairs left on there. And so now getting to the bearing test, so you grab a hold of your crankshaft here and just give it a wiggle around. It's natural for it to have a little bit of movement, but if it's wiggling around quite dramatically, that's a sign that you may require some new bearings. And if you want to test the bearings on the back end of the handpiece, you get the spindle that you've just taken off and put it in there, and just see how much play there is. There's virtually no play in that at all. And in this one, no play at all. Probably because they're virtually new handpieces. I mean, like, these are for my show sharing. So, you know, if they had stuffed bearings in them, I wouldn't be using them for sharing competitions. So that's how you do that. If they need a bit of a wipe, give them a wipe. And now it's a matter of putting them all back together. So preferably you want the cogs to go back on the way they came off. That's not going to slip on there if there is a cog attached. So slide that back on there. Spindle back in there. One cog. And you don't have to overdo the cogs too much, because when the handpiece runs, it sort of automatically self-tightens. But you know, I've known guys that have had their handpieces serviced by a rep, by which company I shall not name, and they've just done it finger tight, and next thing you know, the cog vibrates off in the bucket when you're driving along a gravelly road, and you know, you have problems. So it doesn't do any harm to give them a bit of a tweak. So now, if that's dirty in there, give that a clean if you want it presentable for customs, and put that in there. Put your ferrule on loosely. Slide that on, just check for any dirt that might be on the inside there. Looks pretty clean. So I'll just slip that back on and put the cog back on. Sometimes I find it easier if the back end is still pulled out a little bit, so as the end of that thread is, you know, just sticking out a tiny little bit, because otherwise this cog will jam up against that cog. So I'll pop that in there, and I can put the screwdriver in the front there and thread it back on. And again, just give a quick nip, because you know you don't want it vibrating out. And if you're travelling overseas, you're flying on a plane or something, you know, you're probably going to be travelling light. You might not have all the tools handy to put your handpiece back together. So, you know, just take the extra 10 seconds and do it right the first time. So now all we have to do is get this clip back on. As I said, probably one of the hardest parts of the handpiece to do. So for this I'm going to employ my glove again, because contrary to myth, I'm not a man of steel, you know. Pop our caps back on. Quite tight fitting. If you want to, you can put a bit of extra grease on the inside of these caps. There's already grease in those, so I don't see the need to. And put it on one cap. So you can either do that with your hands or with a screwdriver. And so quite often what I'll do is I'll just put a screwdriver up in here so as it's catching like that. And then twist it so as it slides up over the cap. It's a bit hard to do from that angle. Quite often I prefer to have the handpiece resting in my lap whenever I'm doing this, just because it holds it a bit more firmly. But for the sake of doing this video, I thought, well, it's going to be a bit hard to hold my phone and try and do that at the same time. So here we go. Try the other end. So that's 1/2 pie on. And like I was saying at the start of the video, you know, you don't want to overstretch these springs, because, you know, it'll just loosen up the back end of your handpiece. So the less stretching you do, the better. And it's a bit hard to get this up over the cap, but yeah, once you can get it over the edge like that, you know, it's a little bit easier. So once you've gotten it over the top there, quite often it's just a matter of pushing it in and it's back on. So yeah, there you have it. So now it's just a matter of tightening up the ferrule again, putting your cap back on, because you don't want wool to go inside there, and there's your handpiece, all cleaned and ready for inspection.